Ah, he replied, very good. I see how it is, say no more. Touching this matter of compensation, what you observe is very just. In fact, it is excessively so. But the first contribution, the first, I say, it is never the magazine custom to pay for. You comprehend, eh? The truth is, we are usually the recipients in such case. Mr. Crabbe smiled blandly as he emphasized the word recipients. For the most part, we are paid for the insertion of a maiden attempt, especially in verse. In the second place, Mr. Bob, the magazine rule is never to disperse what we term in France the argent comptant. I have no doubt you understand. In a quarter or two after publication of the article, or in a year or two, we make no objection to giving our note at 9 months, provided always that we can so arrange our affairs as to be quite certain of a burst-up in 6. I really do hope, Mr. Bob, that you will look upon this explanation as satisfactory. Here Mr. Crabbe concluded, and the tears stood in his eyes. Grieved to the soul at having been, however innocently, the cause of pain to so eminent and so sensitive a man, I hastened to apologize and to reassure him by expressing my perfect coincidence with his views, as well as my entire appreciation of the delicacy of his position. Having done all this in a neat speech, I took leave. One fine morning, very shortly afterward, I awoke and found myself famous. The extent of my renown will be best estimated by reference to the editorial opinions of the day. These opinions, it will be seen, were embodied in critical notices of the number of the Lollipop containing my poem, and are perfectly satisfactory, conclusive, and clear, with the exception, perhaps, of the hieroglyphical marks September 15-1 T, appended to each of the critiques. The Owl, a journal of profound sagacity, and well known for the deliberate gravity of its literary decisions, the Owl, I say, spoke as follows. The Lollipop, the October number of this delicious magazine, surpasses its predecessors and sets competitions at defiance in the beauty of its typography and paper, in the number and excellence of its steel plates, as well as in the literary merit of its contributions. The Lollipop compares with its slow-paced rivals as Hyperion with Satyr. The Humdrum, the Rowdy Dow, and the Goosetherum excel, it is true, in braggadocio, but in all other points give us the Lollipop. How this celebrated journal can sustain its evidently tremendous expenses is more than we can understand. To be sure, it has a circulation of 100,000, and its subscription list has increased 1/4 during the last month. But, on the other hand, the sums it disperses constantly for contributions are inconceivable. It is reported that Mr. Slias received no less than 37.5 cents for his inimitable paper on pigs, with Mr. Crabbe as editor, and with such names upon the list of contributors as Snob and Slias. There can be no such word as fail for the Lollipop. Go and subscribe. September 15-1 T. I must say that I was gratified with this high-toned notice from a paper so respectable as the Owl. The placing my name, that is to say my nom de guerre, in priority of station to that of the great Slias, was a compliment as happy as I felt it to be deserved. My attention was next arrested by these paragraphs in The Toad, a print highly distinguished for its uprightness and independence from its entire freedom from sycophancy and subservience to the givers of dinners. The Lollipop for October is out in advance of all its contemporaries, and infinitely surpasses them, of course, in the splendor of its embellishments, as well as in the richness of its contents. The Humdrum, the Rowdy Dow, the Goosetherum excel, we admit, in braggadocio, but in all other points give us the Lollipop. How this celebrated magazine can sustain its evidently tremendous expenses is more than we can understand. To be sure, it has a circulation of 200,000, and its subscription list has increased 1/3 during the last fortnight. But On the other hand, the sums it disperses monthly for contributions are fearfully great. We learn that Mr. Mumblethumb received no less than 50 cents for his late monody in a mud puddle. Among the original contributions to the present number, we notice, besides the eminent editor, Mr. Crabbe, such men as Snob, Slyus, and Mumblethumb. Apart from the editorial matter, the most valuable paper, nevertheless, is, we think, a poetical gem by Snob on the oil of Bob. But our readers must not suppose from the title of this incomparable bijou that it bears any similitude to some balderdash on the same subject by a certain contemptible individual whose name is unmentionable to ears polite. The present poem on the oil of Bob has excited universal anxiety and curiosity in respect to the owner of the evident pseudonym, Snob. A curiosity which, happily, we have it in our power to satisfy. Snob is the nom de plume of Mr. Thingum Bob, of this city, a relative of the great Mr. Thingum, after whom he is named, and otherwise connected with the most illustrious families of the state. His father, Thomas Bob, Esquire, is an opulent merchant in Smug, September 15 T. This generous approbation touched me to the heart, the more especially as it emanated from a source so avowedly, so proverbially pure as the toad. The word balderdash, as applied to the oil of Bob of the fly, I considered singularly pungent and appropriate. The words gem and bijou, however, used in reference to my composition, struck me as being in some degree feeble. They seemed to me to be deficient in force. They were not sufficiently prononcé, as we have it in France. I had hardly finished reading the Toad when a friend placed in my hands a copy of the Mole, a daily enjoying high reputation for the keenness of its perception about matters in general, and for the open, honest, above-ground style of its editorials. The Mole spoke of the lollipop as follows. We have just received the lollipop for October, and must say that never before have we perused any single number of any periodical which afforded us a felicity so supreme. We speak advisedly. The humdrum, the rowdy-dow, and the goose-the-rump-foodle must look well to their laurels. These prints, no doubt, surpass everything in loudness of pretension, but in all other points give us the lollipop. How this celebrated magazine can sustain its evidently tremendous expenses is more than we can comprehend. To be sure, it has a circulation of 300,000, and its subscription list has increased 1/2 within the last week. But then the sum it disperses monthly for contributions is astonishingly enormous. We have it upon good authority that Mr. Fatquack received no less than 62 cents and a half for his late domestic novelette, The Dishclout. The contributors to the number before us are Mr. Crabbe, the eminent editor, Snob, Mumblethumb, Fatquack, and others. But after the inimitable compositions of the editor himself, we prefer a diamond-like effusion from the pen of a rising poet who writes under the signature Snob, a nom de guerre which we predict will one day extinguish the radiance of Boz. Snob, we learn, is a Mr. Thingum Bob, Esquire, sole heir of a wealthy merchant in this city, Thomas Bob, Esquire, and a near relative of the distinguished Mr. Thingum. The title of Mr. B's admirable poem is The Oil of Bob, a somewhat unfortunate name, by the by, as some contemptible vagabond connected with the penny press has already disgusted the town with a great deal of drivel upon the same topic. There will be no danger, however, of confounding the compositions. September 15 T. The generous approbation of so clear-sighted a journal as the Mole penetrated my soul with delight. The only objection which occurred to me was that the terms contemptible vagabond might have been better written odious and contemptible, wretch, villain, and vagabond. This would have sounded more gracefully, I think. Diamond-like also was scarcely, it will be admitted, of sufficient intensity to express what the Mole evidently thought of the brilliancy of the oil of Bob. On the same afternoon in which I saw these notices in the Owl, the Toad, and the Mole, I happened to meet with a copy of the Daddy Longlegs, a periodical proverbial for the extreme extent of its understanding. and it was the daddy longlegs which spoke thus. The Lollipop. This gorgeous magazine is already before the public for October. The question of preeminence is forever put to rest, and hereafter it will be excessively preposterous in the humdrum, the rowdy dow, or the goose therum foodle to make any further spasmodic attempts at competition. These journals may excel the Lollipop in outcry, but in all other points, give us the Lollipop. How this celebrated magazine can sustain its evidently tremendous expenses is past comprehension. To be sure, it has a circulation of precisely 500,000, and its subscription list has increased 75% within the last couple of days. But then the sums it disperses monthly for contributions are scarcely credible. We are cognizant of the fact that Mademoiselle Cribblelittle received no less than 87 cents and a half for her late valuable revolutionary tale entitled The Yorktown Katydid and the Bunker Hill Katydid. And the Yorktown Katydid and the Bunker Hill Katydidn't. The most able papers in the present number are, of course, those furnished by the editor, the eminent Mr. Crabbe, but there are numerous magnificent contributions from such names as Snob, Mademoiselle Cribblelittle, Slyus, Mrs. Fibblelittle, Mumblethumb, Mrs. Squibblelittle, and last, though not least, Fatquack. The world may be well challenged to produce so rich a galaxy of genius. The poem over the signature Snob is, we find, attracting universal commendation, and we are constrained to say deserves, if possible, even more applause than it has received. The Oil of Bob is the title of this masterpiece of eloquence and art. One or two of our readers may have a very faint, although sufficiently disgusting recollection of a poem similarly entitled The Perpetration of a Miserable Penny-a-liner, Mendicant, and Cutthroat, connected in the capacity of scullion, we believe, with one of the indecent prints about the purlieus of the city. We beg them, for God's sake, not to confound the compositions. The author of The Oil of Bob is, we hear, Thingum Bob, Esquire, a gentleman of high genius and a scholar. Snob is merely a nom de guerre. September 1501 T.